This live presentation was produced in Ashland, Oregon by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. RVML relies on the support of our volunteers, members, and donors to organize and present these programs. For more information about this presentation, or to borrow, download, or purchase other recordings from our catalog, please visit our website at rvml.org.
Let's take a moment and see if we have bodies. So you want to kind of start at the top of your head and sweep down through your body with your attention. And as you sweep down through it, see if you notice anything in particular. Sensations, qualities, tensions, movement, energy. Just take a moment. Okay. Now we're going to focus our attention in three particular places. So start at the sacrum, which is right at the base of the spine. Just put your attention there. And again, you're noticing tension, space, energy, openness, how it feels, any sensation. And now you're going to move your attention up to between the shoulder blades, right behind the heart. So, between the shoulder blades, behind the heart. And just take a little snapshot there. Now we're going to move the attention up to right where the spine enters the skull. So right at the base of the head and the occiput area. So right as the spine goes into the skull. So then just extend your awareness a little bit to feel the quality of the room, having just done that. So what it's like to be in a group of people that have just kind of combed through their system like that. And notice what it does to the social space, the feeling in the room. and your sensation of the beings around you. So I'm going to pose a few questions which we'll kind of let sit through the period of my talk, but I just want you to consider them and we'll pick them up at the end. First question is, when you're looking like this, when you're tuning into your body, who's looking? Just consider that. Who's looking? Second question, with great faith, we all go to sleep every night, and we all wake up ourselves in the morning. What creates the continuity of the self during the sleep state? Is it in the mind? Is it the neurons? Is it in the body? Is there some other mechanism? What maintains the continuity of our self through the sleep state? Third question. When you're having an experience, any kind of an experience, and something changes within you and the experience seems to change its tone and structure, what's changing? So we'll just keep those vibrating somewhere out there. And then we're going to take a little segue into Rumi, which is always useful. When you do a poem from a great being, you're taking a joyride on a state. He composed nearly all of his poetry in a semi-absorbed state, often whirling, and he would spontaneously put together perfectly rhymed couplets, which I can't do in Persian, I apologize for that. Perfectly rhymed couplets who people called the secretaries of the secret, who were people around him would write down what he said, and then they'd cross-reference it to make sure they got it right. Because when something's coming through from an elevated state, it actually changes the perceivers considerably, and so you're going to get different versions, which is a clue about the experience question. So this is one of many, many, many thousands of poems that he brought through. For hundreds of thousands of years, I have been dust upon the wind. Every once in a while, I wake up in this space and time waiting room. But then I go out and I drink of the milk of millennia. We each pour ourselves into our appointed duty every day. And every night we fall back into the arms of a loving nowhere. But this is too small a container to live in. How are we to drink the milk of millennia? If you consider who is perceiving, you will notice that based on numerous circumstances, the quality of how you're perceiving can be remarkably different. Sometimes you'll be tremendously focused, present, and the scattered quality of attention will be nearly gone. Other times it's like trying to land a jet plane through bumpy landscape. You're trying to come down and your attention skitters all over the place. Other times, if you've just had an intense emotional encounter, your entire experience is covered with the patina of that. So wherever you go, the quality of the emotions that have been activated tend to overwhelm the sensory input in other parts of your experience. Or if you wake from a particularly vivid dream, the quality of that dream superimposes itself over your waking state. Or if you've been meditating and there's a particularly strong opening that occurs and there's energy flowing through your system and you bring yourself back to conscious awareness, that too is going through all of the experience. And a practice which is useful is when you wake in the morning, there's a window where you're aware but you're not fully you yet. And if you investigate this gap, you will notice that your chronic pain structure is not there. For just a moment, you're awake and aware, but whatever chronic pains you have in your body simply haven't arrived. And if you're alert, you can watch them coalesce and then suddenly they're present. It would make sense to see if you could extend that period of no longer coming back down into your pain structure. But at some point, when you do these kinds of investigations, it begins to dawn upon you that there's a certain quality of inertia in your being, meaning there's a tendency for things to happen that's very strong. There's a tendency for me to do this, to do that, to behave this way, to behave that way, even in the face of massive evidence that that behavior may or may not be useful. This inertia of being, this quality of prolonged habit, Rumi had some advice about. He said, dig your way through the whirlpool of bad habit back to the ocean of your existence. He didn't say stop your bad habits. He said dig away through the whirlpool of the bad habits. As we begin to investigate what it is to have experience, a question arises at some point in that investigation. For me, it struck me really profoundly when I was 24 and I was on my way to India. And the value of travel is you get to leave your known world, and for a while, those habits, those little whirlpools, are not quite as magnetic because everything is a little more interesting than the habits. So I'd spent 4 days in New York City waiting for my visa to clear, and I went to the Met, Metropolitan Museum of Art, and I walked my way through the visual history of human experience, which is another way to break bad habits. Because it's pretty hard to stay particularly bummed out when you're looking at this extraordinary expression of human creativity and the understanding that comes through it. And the energy and quality of this production is stunning and something very sacred. So I got on the plane when I was flying over the Arabian Peninsula, and at that point, for some reason I looked down and this profound question occurred, which is, what is that which is holding the experience that I'm having? That was the question. It may not sound particularly profound here, but it was a revelation at the point it happened. What is holding the experience that I'm having? Many, many years later, having sat with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people going through a variety of experiences, I've always kept that question in the back of my mind. What is that which is holding the experience that all these beings are having? I'll give you a hint in that it has something to do with those three places that I just had you put your attention. Those are locations in your physical body, but they are the intersection of vast domains of your consciousness, which contract and form themselves into three basic structures. Almost all of you will have experienced these structures quite dramatically and directly when there's lower back pain, mid-back pain, or that kind of weird, strange headache that forms right at the back of the skull and the top of the neck. What you're experiencing then is the impact of your nervous system responding to the energy that's trying to move through those particular centers. That's at the physical level. There'll be other times when suddenly there's a tremendous surge of vitality and motive power, and you simply have the energy to do everything that you want to do, and there's no question about, do I have sufficient energy to manifest this? This is quite strongly called forth when a mother's child is in danger. There's a kind of ferocity of being, of tremendous vitality which emerges, which comes from several of the centers, but particularly the lower one. You also will have had experiences of the heart center in the course of the intercourse with other human beings. All the encounters, all the qualities of connection that we've explored, and all the moods and tendencies that everyone exhibits around you. And you'll find, if you tune to this, that this center is remarkably sensitive, and that it takes on the impressions of the emotional quality of those around you. You will also find that there's places within this center that, when they begin to open, create a kind of equanimity of emotional capacity, where you're no longer at the effect of the reactions that are occurring around you. And you feel a kind of clarity of compassion, which simply reaches out and penetrates no matter what's happening, no matter what anybody is doing. You also find that there's times when your belief systems, carefully corrected, carefully collected, and put together, suddenly are moved by an experience or an encounter or an insight, and you discover that a lot of what you took to be the way you thought things were is not that. And in those moments, there's a door that opens. And for a brief second, it's like waking up in the morning before you come into your body. You see the way things are, not the way you think they are. And generally, this experience is sublime, is probably the best word for it. Now, these experiences can happen very, very rapidly. Most human beings are oscillating in and out of a wide variety of experiences. And the reason that you don't have a continuous or strong experience of any of the states I might have described is that the oscillation, the moving back and forth of your being, overwhelms the content of these deeper structures. And that is why people throughout the ages have pursued some form of contemplation, where you train the mind to focus long enough to extract the depths of your experience and no longer be quite the victim of the oscillation. So the first line of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali says, yoga is the cessation of the fluctuations of the mind stuff. It's not the mind, it's actually the mind stuff, or chitta. It's a flow of current of energy which determines your experience. And it's that flow that forms the contractions that we identified in those three states in the body. Any practice that's worth its pursuit in some way attempts to still the surface of that vibration and bring you into a more direct relationship to that which is anchoring your experience. Now, this is a little disconcerting when you first start discovering this, because we take our experience pretty much to be our experience, and nobody else should be having it. We take it quite personally, in fact, that only I can have this experience. But as the mind begins to still itself and you discover the holding pattern of experience, you find that that holding pattern is in vibrational connection with the rest of existence. And this creates a fundamental dilemma for the ego structure. Because if I'm actually becoming everything, how can I be myself having this experience? You can try that on if you want, to impress friends over dinner sometime. Bring that up. If you are in fact connected through these deeper states of the flow of this energy, which we can describe in various ways, and yet you're still yourself having these experiences, how does this work? Now, these are all important questions. They're important because they turn our attention towards a kind of inquiry, which can move us towards the seat of our experience. On the way to finding this seat of our experience, we discover that a lot of our experience is conditioned. This is no surprise. It's fairly obvious that we learn many things from many things around us. I've been watching this conditioning process for a long time, and it's always interesting to me when I find a new neurological explanation. So there's something called mirror neurons, which are designed in the system to recognize behavior and allow the organism to mimic it. So it allows the brain to actually train itself by watching what's happening, so that when you go to pick up the act, you can do it better. And it's a whole class in the brain structure. Now, this is like a metaphor of something much deeper, which is we're watching existence to see if existence can teach us how to be ourselves. That would be the title of the story of everybody's life. You're watching existence in order to see if existence can teach you about yourself. Now, if you take this whole enterprise too seriously, the bandwidth of your attention tends to get very narrow and frustrated. So a quality of bemused wonder is probably the best thing I can cultivate, even in the face of all kinds of experiences. If you notice the quality of the surface mind, it tends to create certain categories for experience, and it wants to hold life to those categories. And this is an understandable demonstration of control, because the ego forms itself and tries to maintain itself within certain levels. But actually, if you let go of that bandwidth for just a little bit, the inrush of content from much deeper within your being and the beings around you begins to feel a kind of continuous sense of negation and unfulfillment. Because the fundamental issue for most people in relationship is that their needs are not being met. At some point, it feels like this relationship is in fact not meeting my needs. But if there's an upwelling of this opening, which has to do with these three particular places in the body, then the need is being filled from inside your own experience, and it takes huge pressure off your friends and neighbors. It also creates more intrinsic humor. When we take too seriously the action-reaction patterns of the world around us, we tend to lock down on them and become quite self-absorbed. But when we lighten up in the enterprise, every human being is both exquisitely sensitive and tender, and also enormously humorous in the way they're doing it. Now, a bemused sense of humor with a nice quality of compassion behind it is excellent medicine in any kind of interpersonal dispute. I recommend it. But you have to cultivate it. So questions have been asked for thousands of years about how do you cultivate the capacity to increase the flow of energy through this mind stuff, or this chitta. And that's the basic question for spiritual practice that's been entertained for a long, long time. So we're going to do a little exercise to just play with how we might work with some of that. And that is, if you rub your hands together, And what you're doing here is stimulating the nerve endings at the tips of your fingers. And you're going to just do one of these energy ball things. So if you can't find one, we'll throw one to you. But what you're going to put your hands in and out until you'll feel a kind of magnetic quality. So it feels like there's something pushing against the palm of your hand. Now, feeling that, I want you to watch your breath and watch the magnetics. So you're doing two things. You're watching your breath and you're feeling the magnetic flow, and find out if it changes or not with your breath. Okay, what's the report? What happens? As the breath moves in and out, what happens to that magnetics?
You get stronger on each breath.
Hey, what?
You get stronger on each breath.
Okay. Anybody else? This is the laboratory of our existence. Don't waste your time here.
It's the opposite for me.
Yeah.
It seems to dissipate with the in-breath
Right.
and get stronger on the out-breath.
Okay, people are wired very differently. So anybody else?
I can focus on doing either one.
Okay. But what we're establishing is a relationship between the breath and that magnetic field that you're feeling. Now this is a very important relationship because the breath affects that field. Now if you intensify that field, it becomes a carrying component for consciousness, which means that impressions can then come in and become attached to the intensification of that vital body. It's called a breath body in yoga. And the breath body actually holds our experiences. Now, you can just take my word for it until you either find out it does or it doesn't. But the flow of the breath creates a structure of prana, or life force, that's moving through the system, and the intensification of that life force creates a holding pattern which experiences are then embedded in. So that is one of the answers to what's that which is holding our experience. And this is kind of a classic yogic exposition of the issue. Now it turns out, and this is born out of lots of experience of watching people and myself in action with some sense of humor, that flow of chitta, or mind stuff, concentrates very potently in three basic places in the body. The body acts as an anchor for locales of consciousness, but it's right there at the base of the skull, right behind the heart, and in the sacrum. Now this is prior for people that want to know its relationship to the chakra system, because chakras, we got to cover that or we're in big trouble. So chakras are here. These three knots sit behind the chakras, so the chakras emanate up out of them. Now, if you can change the flow of that pranic body through those centers, through those knots, your experience changes vastly. One of the things that happens is it makes you less reactive to the stimulus that's coming in and more proactive from your own state of being. Now, why would one want to do this? It would be so that you can go into the co-op, meet 20 people that you know, and be just as refreshed when you check out. That's the challenge before us. Because what you will notice if you go to the co-op and you meet even 5 or 6 people that you know, every encounter leaves the patina of the encounter with you. So you pick up a little bit of that person's quality, and then you meet the next person, a little bit of that, and pretty soon you're busy trying to metabolize those experiences, but you're also trying to shop. So your attention's split, and you're trying to do all this at once, and you're not bringing the full concentration of your being to resolving the vibration you've absorbed. So by the time you walk out of the co-op, you're smeared 6, 7, 8, 10, 12, and that's the vibrations you were paying attention to. When you encounter the fact that nourishment is a fundamental issue in most Western cultures, and that food stores are the center of a community's exploration of nourishment, and that everybody that walks through that door is triggered in one way or another with their fundamental issues of nourishment, and all of that's in the milieu. By the time you walk out of the co-op, you have a tremendous mix of absorbed vibration. Now, to the degree that your internal system is arising because of its flow of energy that's moving through it, when those vibrations come in and affect you, they're burnt away. And so you come out cleaner. This is why you can look at, say, a Ramana Maharshi or an Amaji, who would sit in the middle of thousands and thousands and thousands of people and never lose the stability of the state. Whereas for you and I, one trip to the co-op and we're modestly affected. So this is, by way of advice, training on how to use the co-op as a yogic practice. You enter the doors, you check your internal flow, and then you watch what happens. And if you maintain your inner flow, and you make it through all the network of the vibrations you've encountered, and you come out the other end, and it's still flowing at the same rate or better, you're doing pretty well. If you come out tired, fatigued, scattered, or forgot the mustard, then it means that you've lost some of the ground of that flow that's going through. So the breath actually increases the flow of this life force, and it's easy to feel on this magnetic field. It's much harder to experience this in the centers because they have enormous amounts of experience layered around them. But we're going to give it a try. So what I want you to do is we're going to breathe into each of those spots that I identified. And we'll start at the base of the spine. So you're just going to put your attention right at the sacrum. Now, by breathe into it, it means with your mind, you're going to anchor to your sacrum with a fairly natural and easy breath. You're going to let your breath come in and out, and you're going to see if you can notice any sensation in the sacrum associated with the movement of the breath. Now we're going to move our attention up, but we're going to keep one part of our attention on the sacrum. What you'll find with attention, once it becomes more focused, is that it can expand its capacity to attend to many things simultaneously. So you're going to keep an awareness of the sacrum, you're going to move to the back of the heart, you're going to also watch the breath and the movement of prana, or life force, that comes with the breath. Now you're not trying to do anything. So you're not sending light into the centers, you're not trying to relax it, you're simply observing very carefully, with lots of attention, the effect of the motion of the breath and the prana on these two centers. Now we're going to add the one that's at the base of the skull, right where the spine comes into the skull. keeping an awareness of the sacrum, the back of the heart, the top of the neck, the flow of the breath, and any movement that you can observe in any of those places that seems to be associated with the movement of the breath. Okay. Now, you can bring your attention out, but try to keep an awareness of that at the same time. If you can do that, you will successfully navigate the co-op. Now, what you want to do as you kind of check out the room is both, how do your senses feel? Notice what your emotional quality is like. Notice your ability to attend and focus and what that's like. Has been any changes in any of those states? So we'll throw it open for a moment. So what did people notice when we did that?
A tightening on the in-breath, but maybe a lower in-breath.
On all three centers?
Kind of, yeah.
Okay.
I noticed a realignment of each center individually, and then with the core, and then a sense of extra sensitivity to each area, plus a calmness over my entire being.
We're looking for that calmness over the entire being. That's good.
Oh, no, I don't need it. I'm loud.
You're loud.
Well, I noticed that the second I came out and you said, notice where your attention is or your emotional state, I felt really anxious. I didn't trust that I could emerge. So I was just so scared to start feeling into people. And yeah, and I didn't know how to tend to that.
Okay. Now we get to the exciting part of the evening where the obscurations begin to emerge. So when we do practices, the purpose of the practices are to begin to clean this central column so that our reactivity is not as reactive and our sense of calm, tranquility, and centeredness is great. That's basically the instructions for practice. But as we do this, deep-seated phenomena that's stuck and contracted within us begins to emerge. Primary to this will be birth trauma. So our experience of coming into this plane of existence encodes very deeply. And when you change states in any kind of meditation practice, one of the things that occurs as you move from an expanded state back to what we could call normal reality is your state changing, meaning you're going from one state to another. As you do that, you tend to often recapitulate the anxiety of your birth condition. Now, this makes one somewhat adverse to changing states. So you have a choice. You can stay out, and then you're starved for connection inside, or you can go way in and then resist the hell out of coming back out, and then your friends have to feed you and bathe you and things like that at the extreme. But I joke about it, but it's actually a tremendous issue for nearly everybody I've ever worked with. This coming in and out of our being. And right at the boundary where attention moves from an introverted to an extroverted structure, or from an extroverted to an introverted, stands a degree of anxiety for most people. And this is well worth investigating, because as long as that anxiety is there, it's going to affect your attitude and quality and ability to go in. When you begin to work with that and trace some of its process and roots, and fortunately the breath is really a good way to actually release that out of the system, then the anxiety doesn't become as great. It's easier to go in, and it's easier to make a transition between states. And it's the ability to be in multi-states at the same time that is a quality of mastery. And if we use the co-op as the example, if you're state tolerant, meaning you can hold a deep state of connection and an extroverted field of attention, and there's no tension at the boundary, then you can flow through experiences without being degraded and tired and fatigued. But in addition to all the nourishment issues showing up at the door, there's also a tremendous intensity of birth trauma that shows up at the door. So every time your attention switches significantly from one plane of attention to another, your experience of entering this plane of existence gets recapitulated. Now again, you can just take my word for it. It's worth exploring. So if you find that you have resistance to meditating and resistance to going in, or that you have a difficult time once you're in and you do what happened for gigs, where you start to feel lots of anxiety as you come back out, then that's a fruitful area of inquiry. And the inquiry means, instead of like trying to push it away, or you just, okay, this is anxiety. Anxiety means the sympathetic nervous system is in high response to something. I'm not in imminent danger of being squished. So where is this anxiety coming from? You can start to place it in the body, which is somewhat helpful, but you can also begin to inquire what the resistance to the state change is. Now, if you can do this at the same time maintaining an awareness of your breath, you can actually begin to release these structures. Now, the problem with most processing is when it comes time to process, we get into the process and we lose our energy body. So it all becomes story and process, and you can't move much that way. But if you can learn to take up the content of your experience and also feel your energy body at the same time and the subtleties of the flows that go through it, then you can begin to release some deep material. And it actually feels good. So process without breath is endlessly boring. Ultimately boring, because nothing really shifts. You get some flashes and insight, some pattern recognition, and some mental understanding, and then occasionally an emotional breakthrough. But the structure that's holding that hasn't shifted. So the prana, or the life force that flows with the breath, is the agency which allows this deep structure to be transformed. If that begins to move, then the matrix that's holding your experience changes. And then issues can arise. Anxiety. I'm having anxiety coming out of this state, but I'm also remembering my breath. And more importantly, I'm feeling that subtle flow of current associated with the breath. And I can breathe my way back into a more stable flow. Then the anxiety lays down. Basically, you have to retrain your nervous system, because it's been trained through unconscious habituation up to this point to experience anxiety at each transition. But the nervous system is highly adaptable. It changes very fast, given some attention and care. Now, the three centers that we were going through, anybody else in terms of what happened as they were watching them, could you hold all of those attention levels?
For me, I couldn't help. It felt like it became one structure.
Mm-hmm.
It felt like a ship with the movement of the breath. And in that space, I didn't really feel the transition.
From in and out?
From in and out.
Oh, lovely. Can we go shopping?
Whenever you like.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
So it's important whenever you do spiritual, quote-unquote, practices that you understand the framework and the goal of what you might be doing. One of the difficulties, because we have so much information coming to us about so many techniques and so many versions of what it means to be a human being, that our vision of what we're doing it for gets muddied. So this is the reason I do it. You don't have to do this, but this is the reason I do it. And since I'm talking tonight, I get to give it to you. So the reason that we practice, that we adopt any kind of mind-body practice, is to stabilize the flow of that which holds our experience. To stabilize the flow of that which holds our experience. Not only to stabilize it, but to expand its capacity, so that our experience is multidimensional and no longer bound to the chronic content of our psycho-emotional story, which generally is repetitive, habituating, feels like, in Rumi's words, too small of a container to live in, and annoying. So when we begin to move the locus of our capacity to attend, and we hold that as well, because the likelihood we're going to burn through our ego tendencies in short order is not great. I'll be honest with you. I've worked diligently on my own, and I've watched many people work diligently. They don't burn through easily. But it doesn't mean that you can't expand the depth of your capacity to be aware. You simply float the structure of your personality within that. So the goal of a practice is to expand the flow of that which holds our experience. Now, the yogis named it chitta, which means mind stuff. It's a translation of mind stuff or mind flow, because there's no real English equivalent to it. But it's a current of being, which, as the current of being intensifies, your access to dimensions and realities goes way up. And then it gets very interesting, because no matter where you are, there's both the observable phenomenal world and all the beings who are fairly phenomenal and very funny, doing all their things. There's your sense of this flow moving through you. And then there's other states of being that come in and out at the same time. So it's like a beautiful carpet. It's impossible to get bored. Occasionally you can get fatigued, and there's a whole other discussion we can have about the effect of this current on the mind-body. So occasionally you can get fatigued. But once it begins to move, it transforms life from a somewhat haphazard journey of difficulty and suffering into an adventure of expansion. Yay! And gives you, as a social bonus, enormous patience with your friends and loved ones, which is the hallmark, truly, of any spiritual practice. You can have an enormous amount of phenomena occur, but unless you have fundamental patience at the emotional plane and a compassionate relationship to those around you, then you're fooling yourself. Your practice has not borne fruit. So that becomes, for me, the acid test. Because phenomena is multiform and occurs on lots of levels. But the true movement of one's being happens at the heart level. And the true connection at the heart level is a quality of compassion and patience, which is deep understanding and honoring of everything that's occurring around you and within you. Now, these three knots are called knots because they're like the streaming filaments of subtle flow that come together in particularly magnetized forms. And interestingly, unresolved experiences, tends to be the glue that holds these knots together. For example, if I inspire you tonight and you go home with some inspiration flowing through you, your knots are going to be slightly opened. If I bored you, insulted you, defamed you, or been rude, and you've had a reaction, you're not so going to be more contracted. So the density that's holding this mind stuff gets thicker. So unmetabolized experiences that are of a negative nature tend to stick in the flow of this. And it's like dental plaque. It's this gooey emotional content that folds the lines of energy together and sticks them. Now, once you begin to observe that there's a relationship between the density of your chitta or mind stuff and the diet of emotional reality, physical food, attitude, and behavior that you undertake, then you pursue the goal of self-transformation, not because you're supposed to be a better person, but because you're widening the aperture of your chitta, your mind stuff. So you undertake the transformation because you're loosening the magnetics in your field. And it just is an easier place to be here when you're looser. It just works better. Because reality is not independent from you, and that's like a mantra. We should be getting that at some point. Reality is not independent from me. And reality actually enjoys being discovered. And when I'm in an expanded state, reality takes a delight in that and plays with me, which is why it gets very humorous, very compassionate, and feels good. And that's the reward for playing correctly. When you get contracted, and most human contractions are based on emotional density, and emotional density creates magnetics, which shuts down the filament flow. And it's a very straight cause and effect world. Then your capacity to expand your consciousness is limited. And you're cranky with other stuff on top of it, because it's not socially acceptable to be continuously cranky. But everybody whose magnetics are strong are basically cranky, because they're not fulfilling the destiny they came here for. They're not unfolding the potential to experience the dimensions of life and all of it. So when you begin to understand the flow of this mind stuff and the effect one's habits of mind, emotional qualities, reactions to other beings have upon it, then you begin to change some of your patterning based on the fact that you know when you're more open and you can feel when the magnetics begin to close. And then you stop taking it out on your friends because it's no longer their fault, which is a huge relief because it never was their fault. Even the most objectionable characters that you've come across, your experience, is not theirs. So the reward of a more continuous flow is you can invite all pilgrims to the tent of meeting. And everybody becomes an expression of some fundamental tone of unity, which is what we all long for. Because the isolation that comes from living in too small of containers is very painful. It is the root of human suffering. And when the root of human suffering lets go and it flowers, we then find that we are dancing with each other. And we're looking across a field that is intelligent, compassionate, and truly enjoys itself. Yeah.
So to summarize what I've heard in the last hour, it's very interesting because a feeling is coming within me in regards to what you're saying. So I'm getting clarity with the feeling, but I don't really have any words. But I bet there's just a few words, now that you get the detail, you gave the detailed explanation, a few words to explain what you're saying.
Okay, 3 words. Love, serve, and surrender. Now, the technology of this is, in fact, very precise. So those are lovely concepts. But to break it down into the specifics of what's happening in the subtle system, your flow of chitta, or mind stuff, which is breath-born but impressed by experiences both in this incarnation and many others, tremendous content present. That content, in one way or another, needs to loosen. There are various techniques for loosening it. What I'm focusing on right tonight is the relationship of breath to that, because it's very practical and easy to access. But you're seeking to loosen that contraction through the observation of the flow of the prana, which you do not have to do anything to earn. Prana is a gift of the condensation of the universe. Your job is to be aware of it and to surrender, to allow it to do its work, and to not pollute your attention with needless cavorting with negative tendencies. Now, that's hard because our negative tendencies overwhelm us. And suddenly we're moody, and suddenly we're pissy, and suddenly we're angry, and suddenly we're this and we're that. And it takes quite a while of dedicated attention to start to pull the energy out of these characters. So another thing that's very important in terms of answering you is patience. One should adopt the understanding that you are, in a single lifetime, turning the motive force of millions of years. So take it easy, pace yourself, and don't try to get it all done at once, because it's impossible to do it all at once. It's a slow and steady application of effort which transforms a human being. And the truly transformed human beings, they all have one thing in common. They stayed at it for a long, long time and didn't give up. No matter what the obstacles were, social, interpersonal, health, societal, whatever the obstacles, they kept at it. And that's the kind of courage that's necessary. There's a great conversation that is going on all the time. And when our minds calm down, the subtlety of that conversation becomes more apparent. And it's many nuances to that conversation. There's emotional tones, there's insights, there's a quality of fullness and presence. And you'll find that we haven't been particularly trained to that conversation. Western audiences in particular tend to be fairly uncomfortable with silence because we're habituated by our media constructs to flash our attention very quickly, very rapidly, always. And so when silence begins to rise, the first part of the mind gets a little anxious, but then underneath that, there's a wave of something else. Now, the instrument which apprehends that something else is the subtlety of our system. As your system becomes more subtle, its conversation becomes more expanded. So one of the reasons that one would undertake any kind of practice to make it more subtle is that the breadth of your communication with all things becomes deeper. Not only that, the communication that is taking place is for the upliftment of life, which means that as your mind becomes more stable, solutions to the issues that are presenting themselves to you in terms of issues in your own life, but also the obscurations that the people around you are going through, tend to more spontaneously arise. And these solutions are insights, sometimes very specific information. But the general tone of your being stops becoming so concerned with the self, yourself, and becomes a very stable witness of all things, including you. But a good exercise to undertake in crowds is to play with your attention of self and other. And so you could try that right now, which is see how many beings in this room you can become aware of. Not just through your eyes, but how many beings in this room can you become aware of? And what happens to you when you undertake that task? Does it make you nervous? Does it feel impossible? What are the limits to the expansion of that capacity to attend? The more clarified your concentration becomes, the more things you can concentrate on at the same time. Because of that, groups are an excellent training device, because you can consistently move your attention to the full spectrum of the group as an exercise of attention. And at the same time, you are part of the group, so you're holding yourself in the field that you're witnessing. But if you do this, a peculiarity occurs in your body, generally, which is as your attention expands, your body becomes lighter. As your attention contracts, your body becomes heavier. As your attention expands, your body becomes lighter. As your attention contracts, your body becomes heavier. We're trained to interact kind of serially intensely. So we move from one serial intensity to the next, with a possibility of maybe including one or two other people in the circle. And if you've practiced with a group of people for a while, you can hold maybe more people at the same time. But it's somewhat incomprehensible to our training to do it simultaneously. But it's actually not a problem. And in fact, when you begin to attend from that space, everybody feels seen. And the more everybody feels seen, the more you're seen. And the seeing creates a fusion of intention and energy, which shifts the dynamics of your body. The body is the litmus test of any practice, because it'll tell you exactly what's going on. You can come up with all kinds of other strategies and information, but always and in the end, you want to be finding out what's going on in the body, because the body is an accurate, incredibly complex, multicellular display of truth. In case you're mad at your body, just put that on your refrigerator. My body is an incredible multicellular display of truth. And feed it well. So the body becomes the anchor of experience and the litmus test of state changes. So the practice of expanding one's awareness in a group is a discipline. And what you'll notice as you begin to do this is some people are easy to attend to and others knock you out. The reason for this has to do with vibration. So whatever you haven't completed in your own vibrational structure, when it encounters a similar vibration outside of you, it tends to knock you unconscious. When you've completed that inside, it doesn't cancel it out and you don't get knocked out. So another test, and it's always worth to see how we're doing, is to see how you respond to all kinds of different beings. Not the ones you may be attracted to, or even the ones you're repelled from. You practice equanimity of connection. This doesn't mean talking to everybody. It means feeling their presence within your being. And that's an exercise, it's a muscle of attention. Not coincidentally, that particular practice loosens the heart knot. Because that knot is fundamentally based on the illusion of separation. And now that's great to read about, and it's a lovely concept, the illusion of separation. But the actual practical experience of not being separate is to not be separate. It's that simple and that hard. And nature provides a fairly tolerant and beautiful field to practice in, but the rubber hits the road when you are in a group of human beings. Because the intensity of the life force and the soul journey of each human being is quite profound. And there's enormous energies at work inside of every human being. They're vortices of universal function. So the training there is intense. But the goal is to continue to expand to include all those that appear. And with practice, that's possible. Now, in the course of these kinds of exercises, often material arises, which is embedded in the system. To the degree that the opening unleashes this material, it becomes important to have both an understanding of what's happening and the skillful means to work with that which emerges. There's a class of response that's very common when a being starts to open, which means their energy is running more clear and strong. There's various experiences of being overwhelmed. And so there's a kind of upper limit that many beings place on the process, which is, I'm not going to allow myself to deepen into this state because da-da-da-da-da. I will be a basket case. I will not be able to function. I will whatever. There's a lot of stories about what it's going to be like if you're overwhelmed. And in fact, overwhelms can take place. Spiritual emergencies are in fact, and do occur, but they tend to occur in very imbalanced structures. So one of the goals of skillful means of working is you work towards a balance in your life force. And to work for a balance in your life force, you look at the diet that you consume. The physical diet, the emotional diet, the mental diet, and the purpose diet. The purpose diet means, are you allowing that potentiality within you to expand to service, and is that anchoring you in the world correctly? Without a sense of anchor, the universe has some fail-safe devices, which it only overwhelms every once in a long while. But it generally doesn't open you profoundly unless you're serving deep enough to transmute the force. So if you want to stay really isolated and get enlightened, you're probably not going to do it. Unless you're a few rare beings who've done a huge amount of work and they're very close to the end, they tend to go away for a while. And they'll do it in isolation. But the bulk of us, the service that we perform, provides the anchor for our awakening. And it's an illusion to think that you are going to get significantly deeper in isolation. But there's a tendency when you get overwhelmed to want to curl up and kind of cocoon yourself. At certain stages of awakening, there's a cocooning process which is helpful, but always it's important to return to the anchoring of your service. And your service is flowing through the gifts that have been given to you, whether it be medicine or philosophy, engineering, architecture, social service, flower growing, artistry. The gifts are intrinsic in our being. They're waiting to be watered with true service. So you can undertake your gifts for yourself and you will diminish the flow. When you pick up your service and it begins to flow out to others, your capacity to anchor deeper states goes way up. And this is a very important counterbalance to a kind of narcissism that occurs in spiritual inquiry, where it becomes just about me. The antidote to that is the realization that the me is everywhere. And when you feel that deeply in the beings you're encountering, you begin to widen the aperture of your capacity. Now, because your bodies are the condensation of deep patterns of your existence, they encode tremendous amounts of sensation, feeling, and energy. And as you begin to increase the flow of this current through your system, the body itself undergoes some rather remarkable and dramatic transformations. A great degree of illnesses and chronic bodily sensations are frozen spiritual development, which means some area of your being is being pushed to open and your intrinsic resistance is not allowing the opening to occur. Now, it's important, that being said, not to be heavy-handed or judgmental about yourself. You just inquire into the nature of this resistance, and any sustained and true awakening takes years and years and years and years to manifest its full potentiality in the mind and body. So some conditions that will appear in the body may take years to resolve themselves. But that's true if we're watching the development of children. It takes years for children to land certain capacities. They do not get them overnight. So the ability to understand and create the condition to experience bodily transformation and hold it in its correct relationship to your unfolding is a very important concept. Because many people will freak out at some point when their body starts to do some fairly dramatic changing. The changing is often has a symptomology of pain and discomfort and unknown sensations. I can't tell you how many people that I've worked with thought they were having brain tumors and either went for MRIs or were seriously close to going for MRIs. Now, back in the days when the yogis hung out, they weren't tempted by MRIs because they weren't around. But in our culture, your head gets weird and you just want to know what's going on. There is a place for correct diagnosis of illness, but there is also the necessary understanding that the sensation body transforms itself dramatically in the course of one's unfolding. And how your body feels necessarily has to change. And those change points are throughout the system, but are often accompanied by heat, vibration, sensation, and/or pain. And it's important to look at the symptomology that's occurring in you and not be too quick to label it as just physical. Correct understanding of diseases is essential, but also correct understanding of the forces of awakening is essential. Because anxiety and fear about the state you're going through tends to make the whole process much more painful. So if you can relax into the sensations that are arising, you're not as likely to be stressed. The stress of awakening is enormous. It's not helpful to add a second layer of stress, which is I'm also dying. You can laugh, but I've talked to a lot of people who were in the middle of various stages of awakening who were dead sure they were dying, and it didn't look very funny to them. They were scared, really scared. So it's important to be honest about the fact that this kind of process is quite intense at times. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't proceed. Life is intense anyway, so you're not going to lose a whole lot. But it's important to understand that you are literally remaking a tool that has been crafted by evolution for millions of years. The human body has been delivered through incredible evolutionary forces, and when it begins to change itself, it's quite a production.
Revolving in our body.
Yes. Along the lines of isolation, as your own process unfolds, there is a tendency often to assume that you are the weirdest of any group and not talk about it. So I can guarantee almost everybody in every audience I've ever talked to, there's a bunch of closet weirdos that are sitting on incredible stories of unbelievable experiences and terrible strangeness that's going on, and they're just quietly acting normal. The fact is, the force of history is flowing through each one of you. The force of history. And the force of a tremendous change is flowing through each one of you. And the ability to actually communicate about what's going on helps break down the isolation and separation that often occurs when these sensations become intense. But it means you'd have to choose people who are going to understand what you're talking about. Because trying to communicate to people that are not undergoing some of that process themselves creates undue fear in them. So one has to be mindful about your communication network. Or you can land up in various interesting places. I had one friend who was a magician, went to Indonesia, had a numerous series of openings, came back to this country, tried to talk to his family about it, and they got him committed to an insane asylum. And he had to be very skillful to get himself back out of there. He did a lot of magic with the staff, and that helped. So this is the good advice. If you're thrown into an insane asylum and you don't belong there, use your best gifts well. So it's the compassionate understanding that this is a very profound and fundamental force that's moving through us. Communicating about it helps release some of the tension of that. And also, you will begin to discover that you are not alone in this. The privilege of my position is I've heard hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of incredible stories, because people will usually share them with me. And they're not afraid of being labeled or put in some position. So I get to hear what happens, which is a testimony to the incredible dance of consciousness. It's extraordinary to see how it moves through a life form. It's truly extraordinary. But if you cultivate the ability to listen to these stories in each other, you will have a much different relationship to the people around you. Because you will see that that transformation is working through each person. And the wisdom of that is truly a gift, to see how that works in every person's life. Everyone is waiting to be called. Whether they'll actually articulate that or not, they are. And the calling has to do with the unfolding of the potentiality that lives deep within us. We all feel somewhat insufficient to the task of being a human being. The number of completely sufficient humans that I've encountered in this lifetime in living form is about 3 or 4 in my experience of them. That doesn't mean there's not more out there. But the truth is we are all insufficient because we've not manifested the fullness that exists within us. When I was younger, that was very irritating, and I took a position about this, which is it's not fair, and the universe is basically untrustworthy in some fundamental way. How come we should have to go through this process so long with so little true modeling available? But my position shifted some on that, which is the modeling is actually replete throughout everything. And every human being, if you come into them with respect and compassion, reveals some tremendous state of capacity. For brief moments or longer, but the teachers are everywhere. It's your perception that opens that doorway. Every being has some fundamental portal to reveal. I think that's probably enough. What I'd like to do is take some questions, and this would be about anything that's occurring for you. Not necessarily this evening as well, but given the premise of tonight is that the seeds of our experience are held in a deep structure which can change, what has happened for you as your structure is changing? Are there any questions you have about that? So we'll go from there. Yeah. Just a second.
I took in maybe 10% of what you said, which is a lot. And what I notice for myself as I go around and do my thing, occasionally I feel extra vulnerable, and whoever crosses my path or I cross their path, I take them personally. Today, for example, I was just in the club where I work, and one person came in, and apparently he reflected something back to me that I really don't like about myself. It has something to do with control and domination and the flip side of being vulnerable and the feelings of being out of control. So what happened is I felt re-stimulated just by his presence. It's not his fault. My button was just pressed around him. And I took him really personally. He didn't even look at me. He didn't even say hello to me. He had nothing to do with me. So from what I hear you saying, I'm requesting a suggestion of what I can do to not be, I mean, what I hear you saying is to not be so much out there.
Okay. Do you have a camera?
In my phone.
Just in your phone? You don't have a digital camera?
Oh, yeah, I do.
You have a digital camera?
Yes,
okay.
I do.
Do a month study of flowers. And at the end of the month study of flowers, print up the pictures. They don't have to be large, but print up the pictures. And invite 24 of your acquaintances and friends. And describe what you've learned from the flowers. At the end of that practice, your heart reactivity will be less.
I'll give it a go.
Okay.
Yeah. How do I go from concentrating on what's... Oh, how do I go... It's on?
It's on.
How do I go from concentrating on what's not working in my life to being able to look at what is working?
Okay. Well,
And another aspect is, how do I also have very poor vision and Tourette's syndrome, and I deal with a lot of neediness. And how do I interact with people in a way that I'm looking at them for who they are rather than what I need from them?
Okay.
Those are two questions.
The answer is in the sincerity of your question. You wouldn't have asked the question if the sincerity of your desire to shift this isn't true and pure. So the key is to honor a kind of gentle nobility that's in you, of a true sincerity. That's an asset. Now, moving your attention from what's wrong to what is right is a subtle process, and it takes some time. But what you need to do is identify the places of the strength of yourself and anchor to them, and then you incorporate the negativity into that state. So the piece I'll give you tonight is your sincerity. You have an exquisite sense of sincere desire, both to change and to be of service. If you anchor to that sincerity, that will actually help move some of the other material.
How do I anchor to it?
Well, right now we're mirroring it, which means I'm giving it back to you. So see if you can tell me where you feel it in your body.
My throat,
Okay? You got that sensation?
my back, my neck, sort of a tightness,
Okay. Anywhere else?
my breathing, air pulling in on my stomach, or contraction of my stomach.
That's the sincerity.
Sense of anxiousness in my head.
Now, for those of you that are watching him, he's becoming very stable. So even though he doesn't quite understand the anchoring of sincerity, you are anchoring it. And as you anchor it, you're becoming stable. You're not moving with the same jerkiness. That's because the sincerity is a window for your transformation. So a practice is to practice seeing that in other people. And that also helps as an antidote to the neediness. So if you practice seeing the sincerity in the people around you, you won't feel so needy, and you'll start to recognize yourself.
How do I go back to seeing the sincerity in other people? For one thing, my vision is very poor, so I don't see a lot of facial.
Right, that's, I understand, but your heart is very tender, so you feel it at the heart. Like the people that are right around you, you just feel, where does the sincerity live in them? And then the gift of that is all these beings are getting a sincere wash. So the practice is not to see with your physical eyes, it's to feel in your heart when people are being sincere. Okay, now, as we untangle the nets of ourselves, there's many, many processes. So this is just one door to follow down for a while, which will open another door. So that will not solve everything, but it's a doorway. And the doorway is named sincerity. Okay?
Thank you.
Quite a few years ago, I had sort of an opening that happened to me very spontaneously, like I wasn't looking for that to happen to me at all. I was just doing my thing. For the 12 months after that happened, I wanted to, speak about that as much as I could or whatever. I wanted to express that. Due to circumstances, after about 12 months or 18 months, I slowly just became quieter and quieter about what I was experiencing. Mm-hmm. And so that's been going on for a few years now. But in the last couple of months, that intensity is starting to re-enter, and it's just difficult to know what to do with that, especially...
Spill water, that's what this to do with it. That's our omen for you. When an opening begins to reappear, the stress on the physical body begins to ramp up. And at that point, you want to balance the sympathetics as much as possible. Now, the primary ways to bring the sympathetic nervous system back into balance is watching your breath, actually. It helps it a lot. It relaxes and brings the sympathetics down. Deep relaxation through breathing is very, very helpful. So steadily, like 10 or 15 minutes, and then you have to watch, because if you watch the breath too much, you're going to get the current going too much. So it's a balancing act, where you've used the breath to bring the nervous system into a better state of balance. And right and left nostril breathing is very helpful for that. So you breathe right and left, and that gets the two sides, the parasympathetics and the sympathetics, in better balance. So that's very important and very helpful. Your diet is extremely important, physical diet. And you have to be very mindful of what you eat, how much you eat, and how late you eat. So when the current begins to really move, the digestive fire gets quite disturbed. And the quality of food is essential, and the amount is essential. So be very careful how much you eat and the quality you eat. As to what to eat, you have to be choosing it for your own system. So just be very, very aware of what you put in your mouth and how it feels, and make some choices based on that. At an emotional level, there's a whole piece with your mother that you need to work with. So that would be a good, if you want to talk to a counselor or a friend, or do some kind of work about, describe your relationship with your mother, and go through some of the psychodynamics of what that was about. Because at the emotional level, that's creating quite a bit of compression. So some work there would be very helpful. A moderate amount of exercise is also quite important. You don't want to do too much because it strains the system too much and gets you out of balance. But walking and swimming and bicycle riding are very important. And you need to do it even if you don't feel like doing it. Often in the middle of an opening, there's a kind of fatigue that takes over. And it's just like you can't pick yourself up and get moving. It's very important on a daily basis to move, because that grounds and integrates the system better. Also, the quality of people you're around, depending on the intensity of the opening, is very important because you become highly sensitive. And so you don't want to put yourself in lots of very difficult vibrational settings, because you're metabolizing your own and everybody else's when you're in that state. And so you have to honor the need for quiet and more retreat time depending upon the intensity of what's happening.
So doing those, physically I actually feel pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel like I'm suffering too much from
Okay.
that. But in doing those physical things, is that like there's a lot of there's just a lot of energy running through me that I don't seem to be able to do anything with. So in doing those physical things, is that going to help transmute that
That'll
energy?
ground it a little bit, but the energy is running through you to change you. So you don't have to do anything with it.
Uh-huh.
And this is important. We have a kind of mindset that when all this energy is rising, if we don't do something with it, it may not work well. We need to do something with it. What you need to do is witness it and try to track what it's actually doing in your system. And that's a kind of meditative. Is you scan your system and think, well, today my liver is being worked on. That's interesting. And the right side of my head is being worked on. That's interesting. It becomes a kind of self-discovery of where the energy is moving. And the more that you track its true motion, it will not feel so it won't feel so overstimulated and so great, because its purpose is to change you. So you have to follow with minute concentration where it's trying to change you, and that will help ground it, and it'll help the fear factor. Because the fear is it's just going to become way too overwhelming and too much. But you have to follow its motion and understand, and you're building the understanding of your awakening. Nobody else is going to awaken the way you are. And the virtue of this is then you can help others. So take notes, both literally and figuratively. And find a few people to share it with, because it's important to be able to communicate about this.
So that's probably the last part of what I'm experiencing, is just a huge amount of information coming through me, and that's what I'm really having the hardest time knowing what to do with.
Information is information. The practice is to witness it, and if you were supposed to do something with the information, it will appear 3 times. If you get the same information 3 times or more, then you need to listen more and actually take some action. But what's happening is various chakras open and you're getting all kinds of content, and an important practice is to have discernment. Just because you're open to certain domains of existence doesn't necessarily mean you're supposed to do something about them. And so as you build your muscle of discernment, then it won't be so overwhelming, and you'll know what's right to do and what's not right to do. And it's a kind of maturing process, because when it first opens, you're getting all this content that you can't understand where it's coming from and the intensity of it and the depth and breadth of it, and it is overwhelming. The psyche is like in rebound from it. But eventually that smooths out, and it becomes very particularized. And then it flows. That information is flowing in service. So the information I give to you this evening, I'm receiving as I give it, because I'm in service to do it. And so you practice maturing yourself that way. But those are excellent questions. There's also a website, look up Jana Dixon, Janadixon, biologyofkundalini.com, I believe. It's a very extensive website, describes her awakening, the physiology of her awakening, and various remedies for various states, and it's quite a good resource.
Thank you.
Last question.
Last question.
Okay. I don't know if you've ever heard this story, but 30 years ago, I had a really profound transformation. My family, try to keep the emotion out of it, but anyway, my family was very threatened by the changes I went through. Mm-hmm. And it's only been recently that I figured out that they have been undermining my life all this time. The last 11 years, I've been in survival. It's all I can do. And everywhere I go, there are chemicals in the air, and there have been chemicals in here the whole time this afternoon. I'm so sensitive to them because I've been breathing them for at least 20 years that it has a really strong effect on me. I've been trying to find help for 11 years. Everyone I go to has been bought off by my family. And that includes doctors, dentists, lawyers, therapists, psychics. I'm trapped. You know, I can't, like last night, it was so hard to breathe. They sit by my house running their engines for hours on time, and they all around the house. I can get like a tablespoon of air at a time. I meditated for 20 years, and the breath was all important to me, but they're taking that away from me. I can't read.
Okay, two pieces of advice. One is you really have to work with your kidneys. So you need to get hot stones. You need to have stones, warm them up in the oven, wrap them with towels, and lay on them so they warm your kidneys. Drink more water than you're drinking.
I think they poison my water.
Okay.
All my water, I buy bottled water, but this is so sophisticated.
Okay.
They get the same water and they put something in it. There's stuff in all the food in my refrigerator.
So work on your kidneys, and the other is find a great being that you can relate to. That would be Ramana Maharshi, Ramakrishna, Christ, Yogananda, Buddha. Find a great being that you can relate to and ask for help.
I have been.
Continue and focus. But work on your kidneys.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. We're 9 o'clock.
Workshop.
We're doing a workshop this weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. If anybody's interested, come up to either Ananda or I afterwards, and we can give you some more of the details.
There's a sign-up sheet in the back if you just want to be on a mailing list for other workshops and talks.
And what we'll be doing in the workshop is a combination, sort of a little taste of what we did tonight, some practices, discussions of what occurs when practices are occurring, and go from there. So thank you for coming and your attention.
RVML Resource Center is a volunteer-operated federal 501c3 tax-exempt nonprofit organization. RVML is dedicated to providing easy access to a comprehensive collection of information on a variety of metaphysical, spiritual, and personal development subjects. RVML accepts and appreciates all donations. Material and monetary contributions are fully tax-deductible. This recording is not copyrighted, and permission is granted to broadcast, exhibit, or duplicate all or part of this program for non-commercial educational purposes. This live presentation was organized and presented by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. For more information, please visit rvml.org.